This is the SAU Report, a program featuring interviews with the faculty, staff, students, and alumni of Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.
I'm Anastasia Theodoridou.
And I am Doreen, Durham. Our guests today are Dr. Stacy Clanton, Professor of English, and Dan Skelton, Chair of Theater and Mass Communication Department. Welcome, doctors, to the show.
Through your years of experience, what were some of the changes you saw in the quality of the students?
I'm not sure how to identify quality, but as manifested in performance and in behaviors in the classroom, it seems to me that, like everyone else, I suppose, I feel that students have become less outgoing, less involved in in the life of the mind over the 152 years I've been teaching school now. And I've got thousands of theories on it, but unfortunately I think it's a fairly short program today.
Oh, but I think we ought to do at least one theory. I think that see, there's a double edge to this. I think that one of the reasons that we have students who don't read as much and don't write as much is because they are so much into television and video games and computers. And so they don't read as much and they don't write as much naturally. But the upside of that is, and Dr. Clanton is our expert on this, is the use of computers and personal word processors in the teaching of literature and composition. And so he's sort of trying to, I guess, use what they are interested in to get them to do something they didn't know they were interested in.
Yeah, and that's basically what's happening now, to some degree, I think. Another theory about it, if we're going to get one theory in here, is that we live in a culture now that seems to value every idea equally, and so that, no matter how wrong-headed the idea might be, we really have sort of stopped as a culture, for all the best reasons, all the most honorable reasons, we've kind of stopped judging and stopped weighing and evaluating the worth of an idea or of a notion.
Yeah, I think there's some kind of attitude amongst a lot of students who are sort of uninformed that in a democracy, any idea is a good idea. Okay, it's a good idea, yeah.
And so there's no attempt to evaluate it and judge it and therefore change it and hence synthesize it is something else.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you put together the use of the computer to get them to write? Could you explain how the assignment would be, a particular assignment would be?
Well, I don't do assignments anymore.
Oh, okay.
But it's an appropriate idea.
Yeah.
But instead, we try to use the computers to, first of all, bring them into contact with one another.
Uh-huh.
If you notice, I hate to generalize, but in a typical classroom, activity or interchange goes on between teacher and student, teacher and student, teacher and student, teacher and student. A lot of times it's just everybody sitting there looking at the teacher, and the teacher's what we sometimes call sage on the stage, which, by the way, is one of the things we're kind of edging back toward with distance learning sorts of stuff. But even when the teacher does try to get into conversation, inevitably it's teacher-centered. Even when a lively conversation occurs in class, as often as not, you'll notice all the students are looking at the teacher and directing their comments to the teacher, and even saying things like, now, when he said so-and-so, and as a teacher, I want to say, well, turn around and say it to him. Well, one of the many things that we can do on computers is get the teacher out of the loop by having students talk to one another directly through Interchange, is the program we use, in which they take part in a conversation by typing their contributions to it. And once they get over the fear of somebody getting on them about grammar and spelling and whatnot, they tend to get very lively. And it's really a lot of fun watching the length of the conversations grow longer and longer. Yeah. Another way is that they begin to share files. We're able to share writing with one another, so that old ideas that we've had all along about writing for readers are much more easily implemented when these files are stored and those students can go and find this file that another student has written, read it, respond to it. Of course, they could also walk up to them face-to-face, but a lot of times they're more likely to say more meaningful things when they're able to communicate it in writing. For one thing, they can always go back and change it if they said something they didn't mean to say.
The other thing that he may have mentioned, but sort of slid over is that in this interchange, there's basically kind of anonymity, so that nobody really can immediately pounce on you for something that seems to them unfavorable. So,
In fact, you can make it absolutely anonymous,
Right.
so that no names are given at all. But we almost never do that. But just the fact that you're looking not at a person, but at an idea in words tends to help.
Did you ever feel discouraged on how students view education? I mean, most students just want to get a degree and get a good job, so the amount of money comes first instead of, the value of education. Did you ever have experience like that?
I get that about, 5 times a day, I suppose.
An hour.
You just do have that, because that notion that I have to get a college degree so that I can get a better job, so that I can have a bigger house and free cars and a vacation home, or whatever it is, all of that materialism. And we really face it, I think, in the humanities, because what we're trying to get them to do is to somehow to get alone, one-on-one, with an idea or a concept, and go, aha, wow. And it's something that doesn't have any direct relation to the marketplace, but they internalize this value, they realize it's important. And that's kind of tough. I think we have a tougher job than, say, the business people.
I agree. And another thing I think we're up against is the business people can trot out, for example, I mean, not to beat them, they're easy to beat up on, but for this particular reason, but not to pick them out. Science people, it's the same way, and education even is the same way. They can draw a direct link between what we're doing in the classroom and your paycheck at some point in the future. And as Dan said, we don't do that. And I like that expression, getting them alone, isolated with an idea. One of the things that bothers me about the idea of education entirely is that if you look around at what we at SAU do and every other college in the world, we get these students in here from day one, and we start talking about how much more money they're going to make with a college education. We're making to them an implicit but unstated promise that there is a direct cause-effect relationship between everything that goes on in the classroom and the paycheck down the way somewhere. And we really need to find a way, I think, to change that. And when we find ourselves in a situation where we're paring away at everything that's not directly related to the money education stuff, the arts, music, drama, theater, art, music, when we pare away at those things, it seems to me we just second that message.
You can see this really clearly, the difference between what we give a student and what a technical institute gives a student. They give them the skills to perform on a job and make money. And we do give them job skills, but we also try to round their intellectual life, their artistic life, their whole value system. It's a difference between being educated and being trained.
Okay.
And of course, the problem is once you're trained, if that job disappears, you got to go back and get retrained.
Yeah.
And our people, and I think that's what schools of business and science, let's make sure we say something nice about them. I think that's what these folks do. They teach them, they educate them, which means that they can go out and get this one job, but if that peters out for some reason, because they have the capacity of learning and in effect training themselves, they can move to another one.
Do you feel the spell check and the grammar check makes for lazy students?
Nah, for one thing, to quit using them. I mean, there's no reason.
I mean, I know that it's great that they use them, if they use them on the paper, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Everything's spelled right, but...
Well, but I tell my students, number one, spell checks. Well, no, let's do grammar checks first. There's no such thing as a grammar checker. The only grammar checker I've ever known of was an entire system that would take up about this entire stage. It cost $15,000. And it actually worked, but the point is nobody wanted to spend that much money for that little return. Things that call themselves grammar checkers are actually style checkers, and they're imposing a very narrow sort of concept of style. Those are kind of meaningless. Spell checkers, all they are is list of words. And what I find my students doing, I tell them don't trust them because it just happens that somebody put that word in or not. And so what my students do is use dictionaries, and I don't have to tell them to do it. I don't agree
The
with
spell
that.
check kind of lulls them into a false sense of security anyway.
It could,
because
but-
it doesn't distinguish between the homonyms there,
Right,
or
right.
whatever.
Sometimes they don't even have the predicate forms of verbs,
Yeah.
and so it'll identify as misspelled a word like receded.
Right.
Dr. Skelton, you were the Midwriter Advisor since 1985. Was your job very demanding and difficult?
It was sometimes. Most of the time, the key has always been have a good editor, and of course you don't really know whether you're going to have a good editor unless you've worked with that person in the past. My experience has been that I've had more good editors than bad editors. When the good editors are in office, there's no problem at all. When the poorer ones are there, you find yourself doing an awful lot of things that they should have done. But I enjoyed my years with the yearbook. It was a lot more fun than it was burden.
What techniques, to either one of you, what techniques would you use to interest the students in reading the literature? You know, Lit 1 and Lit 2 and that big fat book with
You mean after the cudgel and the iron? Okay, when that failed.
You know, it's assignments are okay, but to really get their interest into it.
Well, one of the things I've been doing lately in the Lit 1 class, which is a real tough one, I mean, because the literature in Lit 1 is hard to read, especially for students who aren't, as you two probably are, kind of attuned to reading and enjoy reading anyhow. It's a lot of trouble for them, and I've been using the computers to making use of that conversation function. I asked the students to keep what I call a shared journal. That is, that not only are they supposed to read the stuff, but they are expected before, on each day's reading assignment, to make a contribution to this electronic journal where they comment on things they observed in it, and then they read the comments of others, and they comment on the things other folks commented about. And when I first started it and told folks about it, they said, "Oh, well, but you know, they won't do it." Well, I said, "Yeah, they got to do it." I didn't tell them what I'd do if they didn't. But what I found was that once I got them to read the assignment, and then go in and make that first contribution, that students were coming back and commenting again on what other folks had said, and they were getting into their own discussions. So that the end product of that was that, well, one of the reasons I think students don't read is they don't think they own it. That Lit book is what Skelton and Clanton own. And they're coming in here expecting me to play with their toys for a little bit. And so what you got to do is find a way of tricking them into gaining ownership of it. And this is one of the ways I found of doing that they had to get into conversation with one another before I ever talked about it.
Yeah, I think Stacy is exactly right. What I try to do, and what I've had the most luck at doing, like with the characters in, say, the Iliad or the Odyssey, is I try to, in class, talk about them, make these people see them somehow in light of their own peculiar 20th century point of view, how these folks are like people that you know, and get them to make a connection. And once they do, then they can begin to discover some things about human nature.
And that's a big discovery to realize that those are not frozen characters.
Yeah.
I mean, those are really, they got warts, you know, big time warts, and they're really far more interesting, I think, than the students want them to be.
Do you think the basic elements of literature, like the basic books that are worldwide now known, should be taught to all students, regardless major, like they are pretty much now?
Do you mean in terms of like a general education requirement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Should it be one or not?
Yeah, of course, you know, we're getting over into kind of parlous territory here because we're starting to talk about the issue of the canon, and that's there have been literature departments that have come to blows, you know, and come to school packing iron because they were arguing about the canon. Well, first of all, whether the literature should be taught, and more importantly, what literature should be taught. And yes, I do think they should be. I mean, I'm firmly a believer in the canon as it exists. I'm also a believer that we need to try to find ways of incorporating things that have not traditionally been a part of the canon. Literatures of minorities or societies that have not been traditionally included in that. A problem is, though, that with the canon, as it's called, we've got 5,000 years of critical straining that's going on. But with a lot of the things that are coming in now, a lot of the attention is being paid over to the non-traditional sorts of stuff, non-canonical stuff. We've got a lot of catching up to do to discover what's good and what's not, and what its perspectives are, and what it's doing, and so it's, and we hardly have time to teach half the Lit 1 book, for example. Yeah. So if we start adding more into it, it's really going to be a problem. It's a difficult issue, but yeah, I think everybody needs to be able to read the literature. As I tell my Lit 1 students, at some point in your life, you're going to be walking around on the face of the earth, training to be a college-educated human being. And if you are making that claim and have not read the Odyssey, then you're lying, you know.
Yeah, that's it. That's the bottom line. Yes, it ought to be, and then the argument thereafter is, well, which ones? But I agree.
That's a huge argument.
Oh, yes.
Dr. Skelton, I understand in 1991, the Mule Rider had 2 Skeltons on staff. What was it like to work with your daughter, the editor?
It was absolutely wonderful. At the risk of sounding like a proud father, which I am, but the true fact is that she is very bright, very sensitive, very creative, and very work-oriented. And I didn't have to worry at all. She created 2 really good books. They were award-winning books, and the father-daughter thing never got into it. We were just working on that book, and we were partners in that, and it was, I think, very satisfying for me, and I know it was for her, and she even managed to dedicate one of the books to me, which I appreciated very much.
Dr. Clanton, your wife is also teaching at SAU. How does it feel to have your spouse working in the same field as yours?
Well, it's good because we have a lot of the same vacation schedules. We never want for something to talk about over a glass of wine before supper, that's for sure. It's really nice. Now, she's in a different field from mine. She's in education. And so, you know, she's got all of her trials and travails and gossip and whatnot, and I'm over in the other area, got all mine. Next year, there will be 2 Clantons on faculty senate. She was elected a representative from her school last spring, and I'm curious to see how that comes out. We've recently started doing something or looking into something that I think we want to do more of. We collaborated on a paper in which we used my, quote, expertise and the uses of electronics in education with her experiences and expertise in preparing teachers to go out into the field in a Field 2 class. Or no, it was her curriculum class. And that was fun. She had her information and what she knew was going on. I had mine, and we were able to write a joint paper that we presented jointly, and to very good reception, I felt, at a conference. And I enjoyed it. I'd much rather have her working with me than off in another business somewhere. I think it's helped us a lot because by and large, it's been better that we have the same sorts of issues that we are dealing with all day. We tried to start teaching ourselves to say, okay, 10 o'clock, you know, we're not on the clock anymore now. It's time to stop worrying about it. It's time to stop thinking about it. I'd rather have her here than any place else, that's for sure.
You know, let me say something as an outside observer, because Dr. Clanton and I have been office side by side for a long time. And I think that one of the reasons that that this works so well is that they respect each other intellectually, and there's no condescending on either side.
Dr. Skelton, you're a grandfather now. Can you tell us a little bit about your granddaughter?
Well, how do you talk about perfection? She just the other day she was quoting the Bill of Rights in Latin. She's 2.5, and she is a splendidly healthy, intelligent little girl, so full of energy, really quite bright. She honestly does just about have the alphabet down, and she can count to 10, and she knows how to work that VCR so that she can get the Little Mermaid video in, and she is a true joy. She is a true joy.
Who's in charge of the remote control?
She is. If it's one of her videos, count on it. She's got the control.
Dr. Clanton, your daughter has been accepted to Oxford University. How do you feel about that?
An exchange program as part of her university. Great, wonderful. I mean, we're very happy. She accused us one time of wanting her to live our dream, and to a degree that's true, but I told her, no, that never was my dream, because when I was at that age, I knew there was no way that was going to happen. I mean, Dan's only slightly older than I am, but we both went through it at the same time, and there were far more students than, I mean, we were the pig and the python, actually, and now so we didn't have the opportunities that she has, and she didn't have parents as good as hers. I mean, I didn't have parents as good as hers. So yeah, we're very proud of her that she had to do a lot of hard work to keep that, to get the grades and to present her case for going, and we're very excited. Hope she can make it. I hope she can last 9 months in a foreign country without a chance to come home. So we're very proud.
This one is for both of you. At the present time, are either one of you working on a book, a novel, a story, or what is in the works?
I don't know what Stacy is doing. He's always doing strange things, but I am working on a book-length novel about a young sort of down-and-out white woman who has 4 children by as many different fathers, and I have about 120 pages on that, and I don't really know when I can look to finish it, but that's certainly a hot project for me right now.
Dr. Clanton, tell us about the paper you presented on opening boundaries in education at the annual meeting of the Conference on College Composition and Communication in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh, in Milwaukee? Actually, that was a paper that had to do with that shared journals thing I was describing earlier. I presented the information about how I had done that. As I was describing when you asked about a way to help students get into it. And it was just a journal presentation, a conference presentation that it's a major national conference for 4 C's as college composition and communication. I had done one the year before in Washington. And so it was describing that activity of ours.
Dr. Skelton, in 1981 you were awarded the grand prize during the National Poetry Day by the Poets Roundtable of Arkansas. Are you still interested in poetry?
Oh, yes, very much. I keep a great deal of correspondence between myself and the Poets Roundtable and the Ozark Creative Writers. I serve as a contest judge, and I do workshops with both of those groups. I've been speaker for those groups a number of times, and I think that both of them do a really wonderful job of keeping an interest in literature writing alive in the state, and so I spend a lot of time with them whenever they ask me to. And winning that prize was really quite exciting, and I placed second in that competition, but I haven't entered it in recent years.
The group that you're just talking about, where do they meet? Is it in Little Rock or?
Well, there are chapters all around the state.
Oh.
For instance, we don't have a chapter here in Magnolia of the Poets Roundtable, but we could if we could find enough people who were interested in doing that.
I believe you're both interested in writing in different ways. Do you think there are ways where teachers can instill the interest in writing to students?
I got interested in writing. I used to do a little poetry writing until I realized you had to have talent to do that. So I left it to people like Skelton. But I think it has to come. I got into it by reading. I loved reading, and at some point it occurred to me that there was a person behind that who had made this happen, and I realized I was enjoying reading novels and poetry and essays and articles and everything else, and it occurred to me that somebody had done that, and so I wanted to be the person doing that. I guess later on I got interested in acting in the same way, that there's a person who did that sort of stuff. And so I think the key is reading. It's got to be. And as Dan was saying a minute ago, we're in a real flux area right now. I mean, things are changing radically because we're becoming very much a visual society, and I don't know if we're going to see the end of reading, but it's certainly going to be redefined, and we got people now who are looking at cool web pages and trying to go out and create their own. Mm-hmm. That's what my son is doing in my office right now, probably. He's been going to cool web pages, so now he's making his own web page, and so the same impetus is there, I think, but it's such a new thing that we're going to have to see how it happens, how it gets structured. It's scary. These are parlous times, I'm telling you.
I think you're right about it, everything you said. In terms of writing, as I perceive your question, which is like the traditional sense of writing, I think that we can teach people to write practical prose that is not necessarily inspired, but certainly can convey a message. But you have to find the individual who's turned on by writing, I think, is the first thing. And they've decided, I want to be that writer. I want to be the person behind it. And they have what an old friend of mine, Francis Galton, used to call the rage to write. They just want to write so badly that they're going to. And you can take that person and you can help them, you can direct them. But I'm not sure that you can turn that desire on. I think it's something that happens to the individual.
Dr. Skelton, I know that one of your hobbies is the piano.
Yeah.
How long have you been playing the piano, and what type of music do you enjoy most?
Well, I years ago, I think I was a junior in high school. I took a year of piano from a really eccentric little old lady who used to whack my fingers with a knitting needle when I hit the wrong keys. But she was a dear for all of that, and I took a year from her, and I really didn't learn piano in the strict sense. I learned to chord with my left hand and play the melody with my right hand, and I have a kind of, sometimes I have a reasonably good ear, and sometimes I have kind of a tin ear, but over the years I've picked up a little technique, and I tend to play songs that are a little bit more nostalgic. I love to play, for instance, all the old the hymns, the old hymns that everybody really likes from their childhood. I tend to play those, and songs of the Civil War era. Not so much modern tunes. You know, I can do a pretty good rendition of what's that old Roy Rogers tune? Give me land, lots of land, whatever that is. I really play well enough to suit myself late in the evening. I would never play for anyone.
Dr. Clanton, you're a member of the Computer Council, right?
Yeah.
What do you think of the new regulations concerning the fact that only SAU students can use the computer services?
I think they're ill-advised. I think that the university has maybe not an obligation, but should have a commitment to the needs of the community and the intellectual needs of the community and the communication needs of the community. And I think in general terms that's built into the charter or something. But as we were talking a few minutes ago, you know, that the intellectual needs and the communication needs of the community are changing rapidly right now. And while I know we paid for the computers and all like that, the idea of shutting people off from them is, I don't think that's a good idea. I think we need to work on finding a way of being able to share. While we certainly have to give SAU students first dibbies on them, I think we need to find a way of sharing whatever can be done. I mean, computers are expensive. We don't even have a computer at our house, and I'm a guru on campus, as they say. And we don't even have anything but an Apple IIe at our house. We can't afford them, so how can we expect all these other folks? And they should not be deprived if there's a way that they can gain access to them on the university campus. I would like to see us really think about that policy before we simply just jump into it as we've done.
Well, I would like to thank our guests, Dr. Dan Skelton and Dr. Stacy Clanton. I am Anastasia Theodoridou.
And I am Doreen Durham, and thank you for watching.
The SAU Report is a production of broadcast journalism students in the Department of Theater and Mass Communication at Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.